Welcome to the podcast, Wait, What Do You Do Again? Where we talk to everyday people doing amazing things. I'm your host, Megan DeFord. Let's go. Our guest is Ben Lesser, a 96-year-old Holocaust survivor. Ben shared his story for nearly 2 hours, and there were still so many details we didn't have time for. I split his story into 2 parts. Today details time before the war through just before transportation to the concentration camps. Next week, we will follow his journey at the concentration camps, liberation, and his life after. The only edits made to this podcast were pauses when Mr. Lesser drank water. You can watch the unedited version on YouTube, which also includes photos of his story. I want to thank Ben and his daughter Gail for spending so much time and for sharing their story. Mr. Lesser, thank you so much for being here today. It's truly an honor to have you on, and I'm looking forward to hearing your story. Can you give our listeners a brief introduction of who you are?
Okay, I'm a Holocaust survivor, age 96. I was born in Krakow, Poland, to a wonderful family of 7. Out of the family of 7, only 2 of us survived. I and my sister Lola. The 2 of us are the only ones who survived from the family. Okay, there's the picture.
Mm-hmm. And where are you now?
Okay. I'm in Las Vegas, Nevada.
Wonderful. Can you describe your childhood in Krakow? And what are some of your favorite memories before the war?
Okay, the problem is most of my memories before the war have disappeared. Looks like the bad memories just forced away my good memories. I remember everything from the day the Holocaust started, but from before, I know I went to a school, an Hebrew school, and I learned several languages. I don't remember any of my friends or any of the schools even. I don't remember a teacher, anything. It just wiped out. The only thing I do know is that I have this knowledge that came from someplace. My family was actually, we had like 2 homes. One was in Munkaj. My mother's side of the family comes from Munkaj, which was at that time, it was Hungary. It used to be Czechoslovakia, but before 1938, then it became Hungary. My grandparents had a beautiful home there, a beautiful orchard garden, my God. This I remember certain things about that. But in the winter, we would come back to Krakow to go to school. In the summer, we'd go to Munkaj. So it was very nice. My father had 2 businesses. One was wine and syrup, kosher wine and syrup manufacturing. And the other one was a chocolate factory. He was first one to make chocolate-covered wafers, something really? Kit Kat. In those days, it was the shape of little animals with tinfoil on it. Anyway, every time my father would come home from work, us kids would search his pockets. And he always made sure to have some goodies. It was a beautiful family. All I do remember, it was love. I remember loving my mother, my father, my brothers, my sisters. It was, we never fought. I almost don't believe how nice our family was. Very, very studious. I mean, education was very important. Mm-hmm. And my father was an Orthodox man. Mm-hmm. I mean, Hasidic Orthodox. I remember on holidays he would wear a black coat and the black hat, but I don't remember very much. I don't remember very much as a child. From the minute the Nazis came in 1938, it's September of 1938, my whole world changed. We lived in a 3-story apartment house. The whole building started to shake and rattle. So I ran to the window to see what's happening, and I saw tanks were rolling down the street. Following tanks, there were the half-tracks, and every few steps, a soldier would jump out of the half-track, get on the sidewalk, and this is how they occupied the city. There was no fighting. Following them was the Wehrmacht, the foot soldier with their shiny black boots and their goose steps. It was quite impressionable for a 10-and-a-half-year-old kid. Mm-hmm. As soon as they passed our street, my father called us into his dining room and set us down on chairs. He said, okay, from this moment on, there are no more kids. You are all adults. You're going to obey. You're going to listen. No back talk. And this is how we grew out. Overnight, we grew up. And things started happening the 5th day after occupation of Krakow. A truck pulls up to the gate of our apartment house, and the soldiers in them started to bang on the gate. You see, these 3 windows were our apartment. Mm. The 3rd window was my bedroom. And there was another Jewish family right here on the other side of the gate, those 2 windows. A young couple, they had 2 daughters younger than I, and the mother gave birth to an infant little boy about 2 months earlier. They came breaking down the door, and they asked, the super asked them, what do you want? All they wanted to know where the Jewish people lived. And he was quick to oblige. He told our apartment and the neighbor's apartment. They came breaking down the doors, pistol whipping. We were still in bed, and they were holding sacks, open sacks, and they were yelling, throw in all your valuables, money, gold, silver, anything they can find of value, they threw it in. And they were beating up my father to open up the safe. While my father's trying to open the safe, we hear this terrible screaming from our neighbor's apartment. My sister Lola and I ran out through the kitchen door into the yard, into their kitchen door, and this is what we saw. This monster was holding that infant little boy by its legs and swinging it and yelling to the parents, make him shut up. The parents and the daughters are screaming, our baby, don't hurt our baby. With a smirk on his face, you can see he was enjoying what he was doing. He smashes the baby's head into a doorpost, killing it instantly. My God, it's a memory that will not leave me. I see that screaming baby and that sudden silence of what came out of his head. My God, I got nightmares from this. When they came in to to see what's happening. They were a little shocked themselves, the different soldiers. They were a little shocked. They hadn't seen anything like that, I'm sure. They said, okay, Hans, let's go. They gathered up all the belongings that they got, and they threw it in a sack, and they threw it in the truck, and they took off. That was only the 5th day of occupation. From that day on, things started happening fast and furious. New ordinances started coming in. Jewish people may no longer travel. There was a ordinance, a curfew from 7 to 7. You couldn't be on the street. Yes, the Star of David, we had to wear that all from the age of 4. And you couldn't travel anymore. You couldn't go to this restaurant. You couldn't do a lot of things. But the irony is that for the Jewish people, there were no judges, no juries, not even prisons. If you were found disobeying any of these ordinances, they simply shot you. And every morning you had dead people laying on the street and people going around in push carts, picking up these bodies. It was unbelievable. And then a new ordinance came in that the Jewish people may no longer reside in Krakow. If you wanted to live in Krakow, they gave you a choice. You had to go inside the ghetto. I hope you know what a ghetto is.
Yes.
Terrible.
Yes.
Inside the ghetto. Or the other choice was you could go into a small community, but you cannot be in the city of Krakow. Well, my father was preparing to go into the ghetto because where else does he go? His whole family, numbering over 200, were going into the Krakow ghetto. When a young man is walking up to my father while he was loading a wagon, he says, Mr. Lesser, you know how I feel about your daughter, Lola. I love her. Someday I'd love to marry her. But do me a favor, come to the same communities that my family and I are moving to. The name of the town is Nepolovitsa. Nepolovitsa. My father gave him a choice to go to the ghetto or to Nepolovitsa. He chose Nepolovitsa. And that was a miracle in itself, because had he gone into the ghetto, all the people in the ghetto, a few months later, were loaded into trucks and then to train, and they were taking them to Belzec. Belzec was an extermination camp. Everybody was exterminated. Had we gone there, I wouldn't be telling you the story. So we were on our way to go to Nepolovitsa when we found out, my father's businesses were all confiscated. And we found out that my father had 1,000 American dollars that he saved up for a rainy day. He took the money and he pasted it in a religious book, and he put it in the sack full of books that we had, 2 sacks full of books. And we're now leaving to go to Nepolovitsa. 2 hours out of the city, we're being stopped. Halt. 2 husky Nazis jump on the wagon. The first thing they want to know do we have any Jewish literature, books? And they saw 2 sacks full of books. They picked them up and heaved it on the side of the road. You see, they had a mountain full of books. Everybody who had to leave Krakow had to use this road. And they were waiting there and confiscating the books. They were going to have a bonfire afterwards. So my sister Lola spoke a beautiful German. She walks up to this Nazi and she says, look, my father is a writer. He wrote his autobiography. Let him keep this one book. He looked at her, maybe he liked the way she spoke German. He says, okay, I'll give you 5 minutes if you can find it. So the whole family started to climb on this mountain of books. They all look alike. They're brown or black, leather bound. And after 5 minutes, they chased us away. We didn't find the book. You couldn't recognize my father. He's going to a new community with a family of 7, not a penny to his name. Anyway, when we arrived to that house in Nepalomice that Michael rented, half a house, this farmer house, he rented. Part of it was the apple orchard farmer, and the other part was where we lived. Between the 2 apartments, there was a baking oven. People used to bake their own bread. When Michael found out what happened to my father's money, he brought my father a sack full of flour, 100 pounds of flour, figuring he'll be able to bake bread to feed the family. When my father saw the flour, his face lit up. What happened? Instead of baking bread to feed the family, my father started to bake pretzels. Why pretzels? All you need for pretzels is flour, water, and salt. And those ingredients he had. Then he took those pretzels to the neighboring bars and offered it for sale. It was a novelty, and they started to buy his pretzels. Now my father became a little baker in that community. He baked pretzels, he baked all kinds of cookies, rolled cakes, mandelbread, all kinds of goodies. And I was 12 years old at the time, and I would bake with him. To this day, I still remember some of the what do you call that?
The recipes or...
Thank you. Some of the recipes just disappeared. Some of the recipes. This lasted for about a year, and Michael and Lola got married. These people are guests for the marriage. It was done in our backyard. And out of all these people, only 3 of us survived the war. Mm. Michael and Lola and I. Everybody else was slaughtered. This little boy in a white suit is my little brother leaning against my mother. No one except the 3 of us survived.
Do you remember the wedding as a happy occasion? Were you able to enjoy it?
The wedding was a very happy occasion. It had to be done kind of in secret because the Nazis would not allow a gathering of so many people. 5 people was the most they would allow. And we had over 35 or 40. Lola and Michael move out of the house. They move into a duplex. The owner of the duplex who lived on one side and Michael and Lola on the other side, the owner of the duplex, was the mayor of Nyapalomitsa. One day he comes home, he says, Michael, Lola, save yourself. I heard a rumor that there is going to be a raid tonight or tomorrow night against the Jewish people. When Michael heard that, he went out and hired a wagon with a driver, and we snuck out in the middle of the night. The only place we can go to is to the nearest city, which was called Bochnia. Bochnia had a ghetto. That meant we had to go inside the ghetto. Bochnia ghetto had a very bad reputation. What happened? Every so often, 2 or 3 dump trucks would come in the ghetto in the middle of the night. They would go from house to house, pull out the children from their beds, and throw them into these dump trucks. You can just imagine the parents screaming for the children are screaming for the parents. And as they filled up these dump trucks, they would pull out of the ghetto. The parents were running behind these trucks and screaming for their children. But these cultured people had machine guns at the end of each truck. And they would mow down the parents as they were running behind these trucks. No one ever heard from these children again. You can just imagine what they have done to them. But this resonated throughout Europe. All over in the other ghettos, they knew, stay away from Bochnia ghetto because of these atrocities. But we had no choice. And it's a good thing we did go into Bochnia ghetto, because that night there was a raid. Later that night there was a raid for the Jewish people in Nyapalomitsa. They pulled them out from their houses, from their beds, and they threw them into this truck. Many trucks, all these trucks filled up. And these trucks pulled into the forest. The men were given shovels. They dug a ditch, and everyone was shot. How do we know that? You see, my sister Lola and I survived the war. We went back to Nyapalomitsa after the war to find out what happened to everybody. The farmers were telling us as they went to the forest early in the morning to pick mushrooms and berries to sell in the market, they saw these trucks pull in, and they were hiding behind trees. And they said the earth was moving 3 days later. So now we are in Bochnia. The driver unloads us in the middle of the street. And we're there on the sidewalk. And all of a sudden, Michael sees his school buddy by the name of Farber, who happened to be a Jewish policeman inside a ghetto, wearing a uniform. They had no weapons, but he had a baton alongside of him. And their job was to keep order inside the ghetto. And he says, Michael, what are you doing here? Michael tells him the story. He says, don't worry, Michael. Michael, Lola, and Mr. Lesser, I'll find you a place to live. He took Michael and Lola and his family and his sisters into a apartment someplace. And he took my father, my mother, myself, and my little brother to a room with 8 other people. Now we were 12 in one room, no beds. All we had was straw on the ground. On top of the straw, there were blankets. There were blankets hanging from the ceiling, separating each family. Broken down furniture, I didn't pay attention. And everyone in the ghetto had to work. If you didn't work, you didn't receive any rations. So my job was to work in a uniform factory. I was sewing on buttons on uniforms. It was easy work, but it was 12 hours a day, very little sleep and little food. That went on for about a year and a half, almost 2 years. Farber, this friendly Jewish policeman, goes over to Michael and Lola and tells him, Michael, Lola, save yourselves, hide. We heard there's going to be a raid against the Jewish people tonight inside the ghetto. Well, ever since those trucks would pull in and pull out the children from their beds, every house and every apartment had a hiding place. They called those places bunkers. So that's when we found out our bunker was this piece of furniture. You open the door, you push the clothing apart, the back panel would slide apart in 2 sections. And the 12 of us, there was a hole in the wall. The 12 of us could crawl through that hole, and we stood between 2 buildings, freezing all night long. The last person had to close the door, put the closing back, put the back panel back, and we stood there all night long. We heard shootings, dogs barking, screams, yelling. Towards the morning, it got quiet. When it got quiet, we dared to come out. When we came out, I couldn't believe what our eyes are seeing. Our neighbors torn apart by these wild dogs laying in the snow, torn apart. You see a mother and an infant torn apart, laying there in the snow. The mother was still breathing. People going around in push carts, picking up these bodies and pieces of bodies, putting them in the push carts, and taking him to the ghetto square, Bochnia Ghetto Square. They piled up these people as high as they could. And these cultured people came with gasoline cans, poured gasoline on these people. Some of them were still alive. And they started the Bochnia Ghetto bonfire, a human bonfire. Imagine what it was like. The smell, the stench, the ashes flying all over. I knew that my sister Lola and Michael were hiding in a doghouse. You heard right, a doghouse. You lift up the floor from the doghouse. There was a stepladder, and there was room for 7 people. There was bedding and food for 7 people, provisions. Michael and Lola are telling me the story now. They were about to go into that doghouse when another Jewish policeman by the name of Morris Schiller walks up to them. He says, Michael, Lola, I know about your hiding place here. Unless you take my mother and my sister along, I'll tell the authorities. Well, there was only room for 7. Now they were 9. So Michael and Lola decided to walk away so the other 7 could go in. It wasn't so simple. The mother was running after him, yelling. I lived my life. Your newlyweds, let me stay out. They wouldn't hear of it. They just walked away. And they're walking the street when Farber, this friendly policeman, sees them. He says, Michael Lola, why aren't you hiding someplace? So he tells him about Morris Schiller. He says, don't worry, where my sister and her two children are hiding, there's room for you. Follow me. So sure enough, Michael Lola follows them to a leather factory, a tannery. Above the tannery, there was a water tank. He says, my sister and her two children are inside that water tank. There's a step ladder back there. Inside, you lower yourself with a rope. But in the morning, if you hear my knock on the tank, that's a signal for you to come out. The coast is clear. Well, Michael and Lola pulled themselves up on the ladder and they lowered themselves, and they saw his sister is knee deep in water. His little girl is waist high in water, and the mother is holding a little infant boy and shaking and freezing cold. Lola picked up the little boy from the mother. Michael picked up the little girl, and they stood there all night shaking and shivering. And they heard dogs barking, shootings, screaming, the same thing we heard. Towards morning, it got quiet. So they heard the knock that Farber gave, the coast is clear. They pulled themselves out, came out, and as soon as they got a little circulation back into their legs, the first thing they wanted to know is go to the doghouse and see what happened to Michael's family. They came to the doghouse, and this is what they saw. Everybody laying in the snow with a bullet hole in their head. His little girl, his sister, Marika, is still holding a doll that Lola made her for her birthday, the 7th birthday. When Lola saw that, she started to scream, and Michael stopped her. He says, you can't, they're going to hear you. They may still be burning bodies there. So with a quelched cry, they knew what they had to do. See, according to the Jewish religion, you're supposed to bury your loved ones within 12 or 24 hours, if you can. So Michael went out, he found a rickety wheelbarrow. He put the family on the wheelbarrow, and Lola's holding on. Marika's still holding the doll here, and they're wheeling them to the cemetery, the Jewish cemetery, up the hill. When they came up the hill, they found a shovel, and Lola with her bare hands are finally digging out a hole to put the family in, and they put the family in. When suddenly Morris Schiller walks up to them. He says, it wasn't my fault. And it wasn't his fault because his own mother and sister were also killed. However, he says, that graves that you just dug for your family, you're going to have to take them out because I want it for my mother and my sister. Well, Lola was crying, and Michael says, look, he's got the power over us. They had to pull everybody out, put them on the wheelbarrow, and they went to another spot and they started all over. While this is going on, there is a commotion. Well, they hear a Jeep coming up the hill, and the Jeep stops at the cemetery gate, and two husky Nazis jump out of the Jeep. They came into the cemetery yelling, Morris Schiller, Morris Schiller. And he walks up to them, Jawohl, here I am. They walk up to him, they pulled out the revolver and they shot him. This is what they did for people who have seen too much. And he obviously saw a lot that night. They didn't want to leave any witnesses. Michael and Lola are walking back to their apartment. Megan, to continue to tell you how we were able to get out of the ghetto and take 150 people with us is a story in itself. It would take too much time. All I can tell you, by all means, read the book. Mm-hmm. It's important that you read this book because there's so many miracles that happened that I couldn't tell you everything.
What were you thinking during this time? How did you get through every day?
I don't know. It's every day is a day in itself. I did everything to satisfy the Nazis. I never gave them a chance to say you did something wrong. And I never tried to leave early or something like that. I did exactly what they told me to do, so I didn't give them a chance to single myself out, because that's all you need. They will shoot you. So I don't know. Anyway, I hope you have a lot of time because this was only part of it. So now we're outside the ghetto, and Michael befriends a truck driver who was hauling coal, and he asked him, "We'll pay you a lot of money if you convert your coal truck into a double-decker so that there's coal on top, and between the coal and the chassis, there is room for Jewish people to hide. And you're going to take him to the border of Czechoslovakia and Poland. We will have a smuggler waiting for us, and you'll get paid good money." So he agreed, and he converted his truck to a double-decker. There is room for 10 people to hide like sardines, 5 and 5, like sardines in the truck. All these pictures that you see have been done by my sister Lola 5 years after the war from memory. She was an artist. So now the first 10 people had to go, and this wealthy family was paying for us, but they agreed to pay for 2 from our family and 8 from their family with each truck. So the first truck, 8 from that family and 2 from our family, and Michael and Lola decided to go first. Why did they go first? Because you couldn't always trust these drivers. They'll take your money up front, and then they would turn you into the Gestapo or the SS, and they get paid for people trying to escape, ransom money. They get paid for that. So you couldn't trust them. So they went first, and we had a passport between us. If the driver comes back with the right passport, that means you can trust them. 2 days later, the driver comes back with the right passport. So it was time for another 10 people, 8 from that family, 2 from our family. My father, mother insisted that I, my little brother, go next. And I remember going into this truck like sardines on one side of my arm, facing my little brother face to face. The truck starts to move out 2 hours out of the city of Bochnia. We're being stopped. Halt! And through the cracks of the truck, we see soldiers with rifles. Oh, we figured somebody turned us in. They're going to kill us. We're already saying our prayers to ourselves. Suddenly the truck moving again. Oh, we felt relieved until we saw that on the step near the driver, there's a soldier with a rifle. Now we heard soldiers walking on top of the coal, and the coal dust was filtering through. My little brother is about to sneeze. I'm holding his nose and his mouth. For 2 hours, they were riding with us. Then the truck stopped, and we were already saying our prayers, when all we heard is Dankeschön, Dankeschön. They were just hitchhiking. Imagine, talk about miracles. They were hitchhiking, not knowing that there were 10 Jewish people under their feet. 2 hours later, he drops us off in a forest. It was nighttime. He says, walk into the forest. There is a tool shed about 300 yards up there. Inside the tool shed is the smuggler. He's waiting for you. And sure enough, we went to the tool shed, and inside the tool shed, there was a forest ranger with a uniform. He was the smuggler. And he took us in the middle of the forest, and he told us to lay down on our stomach and look up. We lay down on our stomach and we look up, and we see soldiers with rifles, barbed wire, walking on the other side of the barbed wire. That was the border between Poland and Czechoslovakia. He says to us quietly, at 3 a.m., these soldiers will come down the hill and they'll meet other soldiers and they'll have a little ceremony. During the ceremony, about 10 minutes, you can cross the border quietly. If you make any noise, they're gonna hear you. It's all over. After 3 o'clock, they were out of sight already. We shimmied our way up to the border. He picked up the barbed wire. He told us to cross and be very careful because of the other side of the wire. There's a big ravine and you can fall. Sit down on the edge of the mountain, hold hands, and slide down quietly. If you tumble, it's all over. So we sat down at the edge of the mountain, holding hands, sliding down, and then we hit a plateau. I asked my little brother, are you okay? He says, yes. When somebody taps me on my shoulder, I jump out of my skin. Who in the middle of nowhere? He says, Beinisch? Well, no one called me Beinisch except my immediate family, my brothers, sisters. He says, I'm your Uncle Belo, your mother's brother. How did you find me here in the middle of nowhere? What? He says, when Michael and Lola passed through 2 days earlier, they contacted me and they told me exactly the spot where you will come down. So I waited here for you. Well, we were very happy, obviously. It was a relief because we were scared stiff. I mean, the emotions that a person goes through in such situations, it's hard to describe. You can just picture this. how it happened. So anyway, he is going to smuggle us into Hungary. We still had to cross from Czechoslovakia to Hungary. That's a long story. Mm-hmm. I'm going to jump across just to tell you that we're now in Budapest, Hungary.
Okay.
How we got there is another story in my book.
And how old are you at this time?
At this time, I'm about 15, 14 3/4 or something. Mm-hmm. And we come into Budapest. We meet Michael and Lola there. We have a meal together. I had to do something I hated. I had to go to the police station, put in jail with my little brother while my uncle is signing papers that he'll be our guardian. And then they would let us out to my uncle as a guardian. Then we are legal in Hungary. So we did that in Budapest. But when they put us in a cell and closed the door, it was a funny feeling. About a half hour later, they opened it up and they released us to our uncle. The uncle takes us on the train to go to Munkac. Munkac is where my older sister, Goldie, is waiting. And that's where my grandparents from my mother's side, my uncles, my aunts, my cousins, everybody is waiting there. And we arrived in the morning. It was a big reunion. Imagine, I haven't seen my sister since 1946 or 47. No, 36 or 30.
36.
Anyway, I'm now in Munkac, and I tell everybody what's happening in Poland. Some people believed me, but most of them didn't. This will never happen in Hungary because Hungary is an ally of Germany. Why would Germany siphon off soldiers from the front to occupy a friendly country like Hungary when they needed every person fighting the war? And it didn't make sense. It didn't make any sense. Yeah, in April or March of 1944, they marched right into Hungary like they were invited guests.
We will resume next week, where Mr. Lester shares his story about life in the concentration camps, liberation, and life after. Thank you for listening.